So over the course of the last couple of years, since I've been home from the hospital and whatnot, I've created a couple of videos talking about, being in a coma and kind of the recovery process, more on the mental side of coming out of multiple comas and kind of what that's been like for me. And that's been, I guess the outcome of that has been kind of interesting for me because people watch it, which surprises me, to be completely honest. But I think there's part of people, I think there's two sides here. I think there's one side where people are genuinely curious about what it's like. Such a small percentage of people in the grand scheme of things actually experience a coma that nobody really knows what it's like unless you've been through one. So I think people have this fascination with what that's like. And I can say from at least from my experience, being in a medically induced coma, it has its ups and downs. I've never experienced a coma from, whether it's an injury, like a car wreck or a sports injury or whatever. I've never experienced that kind of coma. And I'm thankful for that, because those kinds of comas are very, very different. A medically induced coma is a very controlled environment. The doctors know what they're doing. They know what medicines to give. They know how much medicine to give. They know how much more to give if they need to, like they did with me. Whereas when we're talking about a coma that involves an injury, sometimes even with imaging, with MRIs and that sort of thing, there's no guarantees. I mean, there's no guarantees in medicine anyway, for the most part, but your body will shut down and put itself into a coma from severe incidents like car wrecks, sports injuries, whatever. And the doctors didn't have any control over that. So they don't know what the end result is going to be. I mean, they'll be able to see certain types of damage and that kind of thing, again, with that imaging. But to say, hey, when is my friend or family member or person I care about, when are they going to wake up? Here's the deal. My first coma was supposed to be 3 days. I had a lot going on. The doctors were like, you know what, let's put you in a coma for about 3 days. We'll do what we got to do. It'll make you more comfortable. It'll make things more stable. The whole process for you will be better if you're in a coma for the next 3 days. And that was a very controlled situation. I didn't wake up for 3.5 weeks. So even in a controlled environment, you don't always know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know when is my loved one going to wake up. Because like I said, 3 days turned into more than 3 weeks. So when you translate that over to an injury, let's just call it an injury coma. I'm sure there's a better term for it, but we're just going to call it an injury coma. Whether it's an accident, sports injury, whatever. There's a good chance the doctors won't be able to tell you when they're going to wake up. They may be able to say, hey, look, this MRI says that there's some brain damage in this part of the brain, which may cause this end result, leading to this quality of life. But even that is speculation at best. Unless there's just severe damage where they got to remove something, they can only speculate until the person wakes up. Like I said, over the last couple of years, I've had a lot of people reach out to me, which was even more surprising than people watching the videos to start with. I've had people from literally all over the country reach out to me to ask me questions about, what it's like to be in a coma, or I get that question I hate so much of, is my loved one going to wake up? What do I do? How do I handle this? And the only advice I can really give is and I feel bad, it's almost a canned response of, keep the environment positive, play their favorite music, play their favorite TV shows and movies and that sort of thing. Keep the negativity out of the room. There are stories out there, papers, documentaries talking about, there was a patient that was in a coma for like 20 years. But it was just his body had shut off, but his brain was still functioning 100%. He heard his mom say, "I wish you were dead." Not because she hated him or she was mad at him, but because she thought it would be easier for everybody, including him, if he had just passed on. The problem is, like 20 years later, the dude woke up. And that sat in his brain for 20 years and he couldn't talk about it. He couldn't express any of his emotions to anybody. He couldn't get that off his chest. So my response is always keep the mood in the room positive. I mean, have your heart-to-heart talks with them. They're not going to respond, but say what you need to say, but try to keep it positive. But understand that when it comes to things like comas, there are no guarantees. There's no guarantee if that person's going to wake up. There's no guarantee that they're going to be the same person when they wake up. I'm not the same person I was 2.5 years ago. I mean, mostly, but there are some changes to me, my personality, my existence. There are changes. And that's to be expected in a situation like that. But I recently had a family reach out to me, and I'm not going to give names or anything. They may watch this video, and I'm not trying to call out anybody here or anything, but I had a family reach out to me. It was a woman about my age, roughly, whose brother-in-law had a stroke in his spinal cord, and they kept saying that he was in a coma. And so I found the sister, this woman's sister, the wife of the man in this medical situation. And she's posted a lot, just like Rachel did when I was in the hospital. She's posting a lot of updates and just a lot of interaction on Facebook to keep friends and family and that kind of thing up to date, as well as probably trying to deal with the emotions and getting it off of her chest as much as possible. As I was scrolling through her Facebook timeline, there were videos that she had posted. There were posts, written out posts that she had made, videos that she had shared from other people of this guy in bed, moving around, rolling over onto his side, like moving his hands, trying to open his eyes. And that's not what a coma is. That's, after doing some research about his circumstances, based on what I was given just via a quick chat, I don't believe he's in a coma. None of the symptoms seem to be right. His symptoms seem to be more of something called locked-in syndrome, and that's kind of where the brain part is still working. It's still thinking. It's still rationalizing. It's still doing what it's doing. Very much like the guy that I mentioned earlier, who was in a coma for 20 years, and his mom said he wished he was dead. And he's still got the muscles and he can still move, but there's a disconnect in the spinal cord, so that he's not able to control everything the same way. It's a much more difficult task. And that's called locked-in syndrome. And I believe that that's what this guy has, is something called locked-in syndrome. So while I was editing this, I realized that I completely misspoke in this part by saying that I think this guy has locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome involves basically full-body paralysis, with the exception of the eyes. A lot of times, people with locked-in syndrome can still use a blinking method to communicate, with charts and cards and things like that. But I don't think that the guy that I'm talking about here has locked-in syndrome. I think that there's something a bit different going on here. I don't know the diagnosis, nor do I know the prognosis. But I wanted to clarify here, by me saying he's got locked-in syndrome, or I think he's got locked-in syndrome, that's just wrong. I don't believe that to be the case after putting some thought into it. But I also don't believe that he's in a coma. Being in a coma involves no movement, no responses, things like that. That's why we hear the term like being in a comatose state. It's being unconscious. It's not actively engaging even in the slightest form like this gentleman has. So I wanted to clarify that before I move on any further with this video. So thanks for the interruption, and I'll just let my old self continue from here. The only reason I bring this up is because I believe that that's what the doctors have told this guy's family. And that's a much more difficult thing to deal with than a coma. The chances of coming out of a coma and being mostly yourself again are usually pretty good. I mean, again, depending on circumstances and that sort of thing. For me, up until May, everything, I mean, they put me in 2 different comas prior to that, and then everything was pretty much fine. There was no brain stuff going on there until May, and that's when I had that episode of Press. And that had caused some brain damage, and they weren't sure when they put me in that 3rd coma what I was going to come out like. They had no idea how bad the brain damage was. In fact, I just had an MRI done the other day. I've got a neurology appointment coming up here in the next couple of days to get more information about it 2 years later. My point of even bringing this up is sometimes the doctors are going to tell you something you don't want to hear. In this case, this family wants to hear that he's in a coma, and one day he'll just wake up and things will go basically back to normal. Sometimes you just got to accept the fact that things aren't going to be normal anymore. Things aren't going to be the way they were prior to whatever incident is going on. And that's really hard for families to deal with. And my point is, sometimes you've got to accept the fact that things aren't going to be the same. The doctors are going to have answers that you don't want to hear. And nobody wants to deal with that. Everybody wants to believe that everything is going to be okay, and sometimes they aren't. I feel that I got very, very lucky. There were multiple times when the doctors came in and it was scary. Whether it was my numbers were completely off kilter or whatever. There were nights that the doctors didn't think I was going to make it through the night. I remember some of those nights, and they're terrifying. But I feel like I got lucky more than once. And I wish everybody could get as lucky as I did. But the reality is that's not the case. Sometimes strokes happen. Sometimes episodes of Press happen. Injuries happen. And the people that you love, your friends, your family, will be put into a coma. And until they wake up, you don't know. But you gotta press on for them. You gotta keep doing what you're doing for them, so that if they do wake up, things are as normal for them as possible. So this is my 2nd time recording this video, and the reality is I still don't know what I'm talking about here. I was hoping to say something intelligent, or profound isn't the right word, but something that might help people understand that comas are scary for everybody involved. Hospitals are scary for everybody involved a lot of times because you don't know what the end result is going to be. And even in a controlled environment, you don't know what the end result is going to be. So when something catastrophic happens, sometimes you gotta accept the worst and hope for the best, because the doctors may tell you something you don't want to hear, and it may destroy you emotionally. It may destroy your family emotionally. But that's something you got to work through. So if you've made it this far, thanks for listening to me ramble for more than 10 minutes. I hope this video was helpful in some way. It's not a happy video. It's not meant to be uplifting. And I apologize for that. It's the sad truth of medicine when you're dealing with the brain. Things don't always go the way you want. All of that being said, if you've got questions, comments, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to email back and forth with you, or Facebook Messenger with you, or whatever the case may be regarding your questions or comments or whatever, regarding comas, or what to do, or whatever. If you've got questions or comments or anything revolving around kind of this grand coma topic, leave me a comment down below with like an email address or Facebook profile thing, something so I can get in touch with you, and I'll do that. Because again, every story is different. And everybody I've talked to, literally, even if they've got the same diagnosis that I do, and I've run into a few people, even though we have the same diagnosis, all of our experiences are different. And I'd love to hear yours, or the experience of somebody you know who's going through something. So again, reach out to me however you can, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, here, whatever. Anyway, again, thanks for your time. Thanks for watching and listening to me ramble. And hope to hear from you. And I'll talk to you soon.